Today we're using Zoom meetings. So that means if you have a question, you can either raise your hand using the reaction button or type your name or question into the chat. And my colleagues and I will make a cue from those names and call on you in turn after the presentation. And to ensure the best quality of our discussion, please mute yourself when you're not speaking. So for today's meeting, we're extremely pleased to welcome Hali Dardar, who will be presenting her work on archival material in media art, the 2023 Indigenous Gulf Stream. Hali Dardar is a member of the United Huma Nation, co-founder of the Huma Language Project and Bulbancha Public Access, and the project manager for language vitality initiatives at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Hali Dardar. Welcome, Hali.
Hey, welcome, Ellie too. Tumachok maho to Brittany and Rachel, who are joining in. Sales Chafayat, Hali Dardar. Yeah, I'll get started. But thank you so much. It's so great to see everyone here. I see a lot of familiar faces, and just shout out to everyone who's in the audience. We're going to be playing a lot of YouTube videos on this in this PowerPoint, and you know how that sometimes doesn't work. So we're going to all hold on and try together. So let me pull up my PowerPoint. Oh, no, that didn't work. Okay. Try again. All right. All right, is everyone able to see the PowerPoint? Are we good? I'm just going to assume we're good. I'm assuming everyone's nodding, and I'm going to go continue on.
That's great.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you everyone who joined today. And as introduced, my name is Hali Dardar. I'm a tribal citizen of the United Homa Nation, co-founder, and today I'm coming to you as an artist with the Bulbancha Public Access Project that we're going to be talking a little bit more about today. And my interests in this project is thinking about digital organized cultural participation and also designing collaborative digital events. For just a quick geography, these are the places that in spaces that I occupy my time in. So I work with the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage in Washington, D.C., but I'm based remotely in Louisiana, and I work with the Homa community and a member of the United Homa Nation and work on the language project in the coastal area, and then also work with Bulbancha Public Access, which is an intertribal art collective, which we'll talk a lot about today. This has been a bear of a month. If you work with, if you are Indigenous and you create content or art or research, you know November is always something that's looming after September. It's the time that, you know, there's a lot of people who are wanting your work, a lot of time, you know, things that are really great, and there's a lot of momentum behind Indigenous cultural heritage for this month, but it's also a very large ask. And I just want to thank everyone who came today and took some time over in a very largely business schedule and in between breaks. Before we started this, we were talking, you know, while we were waiting for everyone to show up, we were talking about authentic events and how some events feel like they're you know, they're things that just kind of happen, and everyone's coming in a vulnerable and authentic sense. At the time, we were talking about, you know, musicians that were meeting in an after party and how, you know, a band was suddenly formed and then fall apart very quickly, and how special those moments are. And I'm hoping to carry some of that into today. This talk is less of a hard, difficult talk and more of a place for us to have authentic conversation about this. I want this hour to be an invitation to the broad spectrum of people who tuned in today. I know there's some artists on the call, there's some archive professionals, museum professionals. There's also some cultural barriers and language barriers, and also some digital content creators. And I want to take this time to think about how we can all talk about collaborations between these fields in interaction-based art and archives. So when, a simple way to think about art and archives is this very large spectrum, and there's just like this thing where artists create stuff and it ends up in archives at the end. Um, I don't think anyone necessarily thinks that way. I think we all understand that it's a little bit more complex. And I think that I want to talk a little bit about how it could be joyfully complex, much more complex than that. And how, there's a lot more overlap between the process of creation and the process of cultural expression and, the process of memory collection and keeping in an organized cultural way. The places that I see that most connect, some of that is process documentation, but a lot of that is connected collections, things that archives have that feed into art. And there's also this sense of community interviews or community voice that both artists elicit and use within creative expressions and archives elicit and keep. And just thinking about different ways that we can think about those connections. So if you came here with something that you want to get out of this specifically, I hope that you can get that, and I hope I can provide that. But if you came here with just kind of like a question of generally what's happening, here are some 3 frames that we can think about while we're going through this presentation and talking about the Indigenous Gulf Stream. The first is, what could new media engagement with archives look like? We're going to be giving the example of some of the stuff that we did in the 2023 Gulf Stream. And that's one way that new media engagement can connect with archives. But I invite you to think about different things and go on tangents as we kind of talk about this project. The other way that we can think about what we're about to share is, what do creators and collection holders need to know about the process of incorporating archive content within new media work? Say you understand that there's a collection that you want to use as an artist and you're not quite sure what the next steps are. Or you are a collection holder who would really love to invite more cultural engagement and creative expression within the archives, and you're not quite sure where to start with that. That's another frame to look through what we're going to be talking about today. And then finally, just thinking about Imagineering, thinking about how do past experiences inform creations in the future. We learned a lot with the Bulbancha Public Access Project, and we learn a lot every time we do a stream. I invite you to think about different ways to, learn from our mistakes and kind of move that into the future. So let's get into the dream. It's always ironic. It always feels strange to be talking about Bulbancha Public Access because it really, really did start as a joke. It started as a dream between a few friends, and suddenly it's become something that's really meaningful and brings a lot of joy to everyone's house. It's definitely something that's come out of this authentic kind of experience. But it's a process that we began in early 2021, and it began as this idea of what would it look like to create an Indigenous Wayne's World. Wayne's World being the 1980s kind of cult classic film about 2 guys who start their own media channel or radio or television program. And what we were interested in is, what does it look like when people have total control over the content that's being created and their own view of self-expression within a certain channel. So this started as a dream when we were working on a separate project with Ida Arison, myself, and Jeffrey Derensberg. And kind of that interaction led to Ida Arison and I beginning Bulbancha Public Access. Since then, we've become a fiscally sponsored project with the National Performance Network. So thank you very much, National Performance Network. And we've also, brought in our Jean-Luc Parit, who also found us and is part of the, production team of this, along with Ozone 504, who does our graphic design and some of our communications. So we exist with this idea of increasing participation and representation with Gulf South Indigenous cultures. There's a lot of different ways that this could happen, but the 2 ways that we chose was, we were looking for participation through contributing to and creating a network of healthy relationships throughout creatives of different members of tribes across the Indigenous Gulf South. And the second is through creative opportunities to imagine. So giving people the space to dream and giving a platform for people to share their dreams on. And the other side of that project is the representation component. We want all of our materials that we create to be open access, meaning that we're encouraging people to remix and reuse all of the art that is created through this. You'll see it on the side here. This is an image that photographer Benry Fauna took of Sierra Lagarde, a member of the Bayou Combe Choctaw community. But through this process, both Benry and Sierra have consented, through the process before the art was even made, understanding that we want this to be created, to remixed and reused throughout any community. And so we're trying to get more media representation out there and allow people to have a space to come to find more content. And the collection of content kind of led to this project that became the Indigenous Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is a 24-hour biennial of work that happens every 2 years. So we just wrapped our 2023 Indigenous Gulf Stream on November 10th this year. And the last time it happened was November 11th in 2021. And the goal of this stream is to create a moment where we kind of occupy a certain time, a certain 24 hours, and stream new and old and celebrated content that was created, archived, or somehow touched or improved by members of the Indigenous Gulf South community. This could be members of Indigenous Gulf South tribes who are living outside of the Indigenous Gulf South, or the Gulf South, or they could be members of other Indigenous communities who are currently occupying space in the Indigenous Gulf South. The goal here is to make a place where people can riff off of each other's work, but also that we can showcase an entire spectrum of work. We're not interested in showing things that are interesting. We're not interested in showing things that are compelling in any way. We're trying to show things that are authentic creations that people have made with the idea that they want to share them. And we put this all together on the stage of the stream as a way to, celebrate and reflect on 2 years of, representation, communication, media, and research. Okay, we've come to the first video. So here is the stream. I want to show you guys the trailer of the 2023 Gulf Stream. The voice that you're hearing is Joseph Darensberg, a Takabat Ishak musician, and you'll be seeing clips throughout the trailer of different collections and different creative responses to these prompts that different artists, the commissioned artists of this project, contributed to this stream. If you watch, you might see a few images from Frank Speck's APS collection. So see if we can play this.
Hahane, hahane, haya o haya, hahane, hahane, haya o haya. Ishang hoka bubancha, Ishang hoka mayon, Penny kato pistache, Lucky kankam ish, Ishakito kiti ish, Oti akon lupat pelan. Yaki yanti peltukov, Otiwe anungosh, Otiwe anungosh, Konka na shiwat, Sima kutuktukao. Hahane, hahane.
Oh, sorry. Try my best here. Okay, great. Yeah, so when we're thinking about this collection, the Indigenous Gulf Stream, this year, the first stream, we used a lot of content from a previous project called Unrecognized Stories, which I'm happy to talk about more in the Q&A time. But for this stream, we focused mostly on archival collections, particularly a collection that was done by another HOMA researcher, Tammy Greer, with the Library of Congress, that we'll get to for a second. But one thing that happened within this stream was that there was a heavy focus on archives and using archive material. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what that process was for the 4 different collections that were used, and then also kind of show you some inspiration of how those collections were used and kind of what that looks like and what that could look like for other people. So as I mentioned, 80% of the 2023 stream, the time that was streamed, came from content from archives. A lot of this had to do with some very large oral history collections that we were able to either create, digitize, or make available for the stream. But for the artists out there, I also want to highlight that for those 4 different archives, there was a different permissions process for each one. And so if we learned one thing from the stream is that we definitely started the permissions process way too late this year. It's very difficult to understand what's relevant or what needs to go into the stream, but you should definitely be reaching out to archives at least 3 to 4 months in advance to give them understanding and an opportunity to talk about what's happening with this stuff. So what does that letter look like? What does it actually mean to reach out to an archive and ask for permission for some of these things? I found that daunting, so I decided to share with you guys a sample letter. Thomas from the APS, I wonder if you can pop into the chat the sample letter. This letter is just a basic format of what I sent out to each of these archives to just kind of get the ball rolling, understand, describe what the stream is, describe that it's this 24-hour project, give them an understanding of what material that I wanted to use and in kind of what context, and kind of get the process and ask them what's the next step on permissions. So within the Library of Congress, Tammy Greer owned permissions for using those materials. So we were able to just get written approval after sending that initial letter of request. We were able to get permission from Tammy Greer to use those materials in that way. So that was that first process for the Library of Congress. For both APS and the National Anthropological Archives, after sending the letter, they requested that we send back a usage form. I'll show you guys pictures of that in the next slide. And after we got the usage form in, then we were clear to use the content. And then we use content from the Center for Louisiana Studies, which is a Louisiana state-based museum and archive in Lafayette, Louisiana. For this, we were using a collection where the creator of the collection was no longer kind of associated with the center, but also still alive. So before we even reached out to the center to get to start the process of permissions, we reached out to the original content creator, Dr. Bruce Dutu. We sent him the sample letter, made him understand what we were kind of doing, kind of answered any questions that he had. And then once he gave approval, we forward that approval to the Center of Louisiana Studies before starting that permissions process. So I think, if we learned one thing or something that I could pass on to our artists within this is that it's best to start with the content creator and make sure that they're on board with any use that you may have for materials before reaching out to the archives. Another thing to note about this process, at least for our experience, all of the materials, the materials from the Library of Congress, APS, and Center for Louisiana Studies, all were HOMA materials. So I was a community member approaching the archive for use of those materials, and understanding that if you're using materials that are not from your own community, that process is going to look a little bit different. So when I used materials from the National Anthropological Archive, those were not HOMA materials, although they were Indigenous. So thinking about, how that relationship is going to change, your access to some of these materials for general use. So thinking about the forms that you're going to need to think about, these are just like basic forms. They're very simple to fill out. But just to say that these forms are not a block. This is not a moment where the archive is trying to prevent you from having these materials by throwing a book at you. This is a form that you can fill out, and after you get the form, there are, consent to use the materials on the other side. So don't be surprised if that happens. Another thing to not be surprised about is if there are any fees associated with the use, especially if you're doing something for a larger audience. So to kind of like shift a little bit the perspective of looking at this process, I want to talk a little bit to archivists and thinking about, you know, what materials were we using, and how were they being used, and kind of thinking a little bit more, particularly to community community organizers. What is the value of using some of these, you know, archival materials in something like a stream? So I want to show you guys the 4 ways that that I used archival materials within this Indigenous Gulf Stream, and kind of think about how these could be, you know, maybe used in some other contexts too. The first thing that I think the stream, using archival materials within the stream, allowed for was a moment of digestion. If you were at the APS talk yesterday, Morris Sullivan mentioned this idea of having a mountain of information that's coming at you. And I think that I really resonated with that feeling. And that's something that I feel very often as someone who researches within collections, and also someone who does, you know, art projects, and, you know, kind of does this on a professional level too. There's a lot. And there's a lot that's tangibly available to people at any given moment. And that can feel very overwhelming. And so sometimes access is not necessarily enough to say that a community is able to kind of ingest some of these materials and really apply them into existing creative use. And so that's why I wanted to introduce the idea of, you know, this type of stream as a moment of digestion. Because we were all watching, you know, anybody who could tune into the stream was able to watch the same content being put out at the same time, similar to, you know, old school television. And so it became this moment where people were able to temporarily relax. So they were able to think, to understand that, you know, the time factor within their life had been taken care of for the duration that they wanted to watch the stream. And it allowed people to focus on, you know, understanding what's happening within the stream, just trusting that, you know, this content is relevant, and then also having a moment to collectively communicate through the stream. So on the Twitch platform that we use to put on the stream, there is a chat function that people can use. So there's a few people who can go on and kind of talk about what resonated with them or what didn't resonate, or how they were feeling when they were hearing some things. Personally, through the streaming process, we had a few group chats going. One was a production group chat, but another one was just a community group chat of everyone who was listening together. And it became this moment where, you know, not only did I get a chance to listen to all of these materials, but not only did Brittany get a chance, and, you know, everyone else who listened along, but we were able to discuss them and, you know, combine them with our own stories and own experiences to create this more of a collective memory around these projects. So I would encourage archives to think about streaming as a way to provide community engagement through moments of digestion. I'm going to show, here's a second clip. We're going to see if it'll play. I'm going to try to skip ahead to, there we go. Let's see if we can get Kirby talking here.
And then one day one man says, well, I tried to get something done in the community. No, I didn't get much reaction. And somebody kind of throws me a backhanded compliment, you might say. He said, well, why don't you go talk to your friends up there at the recreation district? I was kind of like my dad. My dad was one, you never told him something couldn't be done. He'd kind of show you it could be done. And so, or something was hard to do, he'd find an easy way to do it. So, well, I kind of took off on his perspective. So I go up there and start attending the meetings. And some of my own people, oh man, you don't want to have nothing to do with them?
And so that gives you a little bit of taste.
I said, well, yeah, but they...
Oh, trying to move on. Let's see. Okay, great. And so that kind of gives you a hint of this. Kirby's full interview was 2.5 hours. And it was part of a set of 8 interviews. And we played all of those interviews entirety, without edits, without cuts. And we allowed people to listen in and understand and graft with their own stories and kind of engage with the community and kind of have this kind of collective and collaborative discussion about the media that was coming out. The second way that, you know, we used content from archives within the stream was this idea of illumination. I'm using the term illumination to think about media that is currently in older forms or media that is in culturally unused forms currently, and trying to change or transfer that material into a new format to engage new audiences. So for this work, I personally made this one. I took the materials from the Frank Speck collection. This is materials, these were photographs, and these were letters, correspondence letters from different HOMA members from Frank Speck's visit. And the letters were all handwritten, and the photographs were incredibly well organized by the APS. So shout out to APS for an excellent photo collection and digitized in high quality. And so what I thought was, what would be neat, you know, these photos are really great, but the visual of looking at these letters, or like looking at these letters, or something that, you know, I can't imagine people doing. But when you read them, you can really get a sense of the community voice. And I thought, what could I do to make these a little bit more relevant? And so I quickly typed up the letters and put them through a text-to-speech generator. And so it changed these cursive, you know, handwritten letters that were kind of, you know, out of current cultural context, and put them into an audio file that people can recognize, or in a format that people understand is a generated voice, but is an audio file of a text file. And so I want to play you a clip of that so that you can kind of understand what I mean by illumination. You know, one thing I really like about this is that you can really understand the speaker's voice, you know, the breaks. I kept all of the breaks. I kept the lack of punctuation, and it creates an urgency or a different way of thinking about the way that people were saying things.
Charenton, Louisiana. August 18, 1929. Mr. F.G. Speck, just a few to let you know that I am sending your baskets they $10, but can send the mats now it's not finish, yet my wife been very sick not. That why she did send your order yet she said can make them mats small like you want them. She make one for $10 for you because it's hard to make that mat, so she send it as soon as she can finish it. Page 2.
I definitely want to do more of these. I think translating these letters into text to speech and keeping all of the characters that are there are something that I really enjoy doing, and it really, you know, created an illuminated understanding of what was happening there. The third way is thinking about, you know, I think the most artistic way is thinking about the materials in the collection as the base format for new expressive creation. This one is a little bit different, and I think that I kind of struggled back and forth on whether or not I wanted to show this one even in this context, because I feel like there's, you know, the use of materials that are not coming from the Gulf South is definitely something that we don't want to do. But I did want to, in the future, I've taken this material and I've taken the audio from this and I've written it into a blog post that's going to be coming out in a few months. But what I really liked about, I can also talk about this more in the Q&A. I'm getting on my own little rabbit trail there. These are materials that were coming from the National Anthropological Archives based on their stereograph collection. If you remember stereographs, I have an image if you need to see this. It's two framed images that were slightly taken from a slightly different perspective to create an immersive experience when you're looking at these goggles. The materials that are in these collections were mass produced, and they're not really rare. The reason why they're in the National Museum of Natural History within the Smithsonian is that the breadth of this particular collection of stereographs. It's one of the largest collections of these that you know has been collected together. And I started thinking about, the idea of public access and the idea of, new media, and thinking about how much this was kind of a social media post back in the day. And so while I was going through my life of, just flipping through collections, I was actually helping another person that I work with in my day job, find stuff within the collections. It brought me to looking through the stereo collection for a particular stereograph. And I realized that the process of flipping through this was a very meditative process, but also something that a lot of Indigenous researchers or colleagues have. This idea of flipping through a collection and looking for your community over and over. And so I was feeling that at the moment, and so I decided to create a stream of that. And I took a stream of looking at these publicly accessible, early social media posts, and kind of, doom scrolling through these stereographs and just reflecting on my own experiences through the archives.
Every time I go to the archive, I pull out the same box. It's this box from John Swanton on his trip down to South Louisiana. And in that box, there's quite a few images of Golden Meadow, La Rose, and other places where my family is from. And even when I'm not, looking at or doing research, and I've seen all of these photos a million times, I still go and pull that box.
So yeah, and this goes on again for 11 minutes. One of the things that we really like about the Wabancha Public Access stream is just its very uninhibited creativity. We had submissions that were 10 seconds, and we have submissions that are 3 hours. And I think one of the great things that we do with this project is we make room, or we make space, or we think about where within the cycle of a day any of these things fit. So rather than cutting them, we try to place them in the correct space for what they need.
They're all...
Well, come on, let me move. Okay. And then the final use of archival materials in collections that I want to talk about is of celebration, and honor the effort and time that people put into the digitization and maintenance of archival collections. This project, the content from this came from Rochelle Morgan Verdin, and also Alana Ojibwe and Bruce Dutu. Back in, and this is one of the places where Indigenous Gulf Stream really does a great job of celebrating all of the work that's happening over a 2-year period. So in early 2022, Rochelle and Alana began the process of trying to get a series of interviews that were done by Bruce Dutu in the late 70s, that were currently on cassettes. They were trying to get them digitized. They were held within the Center for Louisiana Studies. Louisiana Studies was very interested in doing this, but they needed to go through and get the process, administrative rights from Bruce to digitize them, consent to make them available, and then also kind of understand if this is something that should be prioritized, or if this is something that they should be spending their time on. And Alana and Rochelle did an excellent job of kind of taking that process through, and kind of leading that charge to get somewhere. I'm going to ballpark and say it's about 9 hours of content from cassettes into a digital format. So those digital formats were given to the Homo Language Project, who then put them on YouTube and made them into closed YouTube videos with the permission from the Center for Louisiana Studies for our own use. We then reached out when we were looking to use them in Wabancha Public Access. We then reached out to Bruce and at the center to make sure that it was okay for us to use it for this other limited public engagement. But one of the things that it really helped, one of the things that you can do by putting things into the stream is honor them. Very few people are going to listen to a full, French audio collection of interviews. But there's place for it, and it's very important that it stays relevant, and that this is available for our communities. So, by making the stream, you're creating a stage to platform work that may not be, celebrated as much as it is. It's not as exciting as other things that might be coming along. So I'm going to show you a quick clip of those YouTube videos.
Il a été sur char, pas de char comme ça, il y avait un char à la part. Il a été là, il a tombé en bas du char, le char l'a passé sur les pieds. Il a été à l'hôpital, il a coupé le pied. Et là, pour faire sa vie, il se mettait en cogneur il y avait le monde passé, il demandait
I really like this collection because it feels like it's, from what I know of this collection, I could be wrong, but I feel like this is the last large oral history collection done by an Indigenous informant, with Indigenous informants and Indigenous interviewers in French. And I think that's really special, and I'm so glad that it's a little bit more available in the future. Oh, trying to move on. Okay, great. So thinking about what's next, what does this all mean? There's two kind of reflections that I kind of want to drive home here. The first is for artists or people who are thinking about creative use of archives. I want you to remember that all content requires permission before use, and that, making sure it's not something that should be a boundary or a hindrance from you doing this, but it is a process that you need to incorporate into your artistic flow. One of the things that you need to incorporate is how you're going to communicate the legal aspects and innovative nature of your project to make sure that you're requesting the right rights for the way that you might be using something in a new media work. Saying that you're showing a film, it makes it a very clear cut, particularly for archives who, have a process for film. But what if you're projecting it onto a building and then putting oral histories in headphones? Or creating QR tags or something, or geolocating different sounds from archives in different places, it becomes a little bit more difficult to communicate and understand what rights you may need for that kind of work. So it's really the responsibility of the artist to better define and communicate, the essence of the work that they're going to be doing, particularly the size of the audience, the space, the time of the work, in order to get the correct rights from an archive. On the archive side, all of these permissions, I wanted to note that all of these permissions that I received to use some of this work began with original relationships and also prior in-person collection visits to all of these locations and meetings with the archivists. I think I was able to do a lot of this work because I already, had talked to a lot of people, and, we had, had an established relationship. But I'm not sure if that's, I'm not an archivist, so, is that actually the case? But I want archivists to think about, how they can provide free and equitable access to collections, and establish understanding with artists who may not have the opportunity to visit collections in person before they're starting to use some of these digital collections in a creative way. So how do we build rapport that gets artists to a place where they're able to communicate more of their creative processes and projects? I want to make time we're doing Q&A, so I want to do this really fast. But I wanted to point out a few projects that I think people are doing great work, and that kind of look towards the future of new media and, the connection of archives. And then also kind of talk about a few of the dreams that I think I'd like to see going forward. The first is the work of Jennifer Byram. She worked with the National Anthropological Archives and the National Museum of Natural History as a fellow earlier last summer, and was really working on creating virtual community collection visits. So setting up cameras in an archival space to allow her textile research group back home to be able to see the materials that she was seeing in the archives real time with her. And so there was this collective view of archives rather than her bringing stuff home to her community. and thinking about what that looks like and is that possible within spaces. And I think that that's really important, not just individual research, but collective visits. And I think virtual is a really great way to make some of those things possible. The other thing is thinking about Morris Sullivan's work with the expressions of archival access. Talking with a lot of other Indigenous colleagues, the idea, that moment when you're able to access materials within your own, about your own community in these kind of, very institutional spaces is a very sacred moment. And one of the things that Maura is questioning is, what is the process of access, or culturally, what is the process of cultural access, and how do we make sure that we're bringing our whole selves there, and can that expression of access be something that we celebrate too? So I really like those two people's work, and I really encourage you to think about their work too. The things that I really want to see is that I think that the idea of digestive streams for other archive content and other community content is a great way to gain collective knowledge and start collective storytelling and conversations around archival collections. I'd love to see more of these, and I'd love to be a part of more of these. The other thing that I think there needs to be is more collective digital discussions around archive collections. I'd love to see a space where people could collaborate on their own experiences with accessing certain collections. This might be easier if it wasn't, hosted by an institution, but it was something that was done in another space. I'm thinking more of like a Wikipedia of experiences and access, so that people can kind of share those collective experiences and inform each other within the work. So really interrogating this idea of research as individual experience. And if there's one thing I think I want to end with is this idea that this idea of new media, or this idea of the stream, and one thing that we're really proud of is being able to support new voices. So shout out to Rachel Billiat-Brule, which I think is who is in the audience today. But she was recently named as the Region 6 representative for the Youth Advisory Council for the Environmental Protection Agency. So she is one of 10 youth who will be representing, the next generation as we talk about the future of our climate and the future of the United States in general environment. But she was also able to, she's a member of the United Homa Nation, and she also made a piece for the Indigenous Gulf Stream. And I think she did a really great work of collecting these community voices of her own family, and also pairing it with her art to kind of show this voice. And we're just really proud that the Boldancha Public Access Indigenous Gulf Stream made a platform for her to show this. So.
Thank you so much, Ili.
It was nighttime. I had the stars above to look at, and I seen many shooting stars, and comets and meteors and all that stuff. And then look under the boat, sometimes you see things And they were whales, because I've seen them out there quite a few trips. Bigger than the tugboat, and the tugboat was like around 75 footer. And these were bigger than that, swirling under the boat. I don't think I've ever made a trip that I hadn't seen a whale. They're beautiful, man.
Do you remember the cypress knees that used to be 6 feet tall, 5 feet tall, as big as us standing up? Yeah, we were 5 feet tall and they were like big as us. We were walking around and we were like, what? This is where Bigfoot used to live?
I realized when my first daughters were born that we were losing it.
They had a church and a couple of little villages in the area. And they had a sawmill. They had a saw blade there that was like 5 feet high, maybe 6. That's when they made a wooden mill back there to cut down all the cypress. And I mean, they had nothing but was called a cypress ridge. Hundreds and hundreds of cypress trees came out of there. And they either were too big, they couldn't get them out, or they couldn't get to them. That's the only reason they had any left, because they cut them down till it was spent pulses. It was terrible.
The places that we have gone to hunt rabbits and deer, let's say 1 year. 5 years from now, we're pulling a net catching shrimp and fish in the same place. That's how much everything deteriorates out there.
Those falls, I remember fishing in these falls when there were cypress trees that caught a lot of fish. Now that the falls are popping up, dying, there's no cover for the fish to be able to breed and hide and just grow big. There's really no hope to stop what's dying now, but to try to stop it from dying any further, or the new growth to start growing again. You get something back like they used to have for the younger generation.
And so I think that's where I want to end and open up a conversation and say thank you. I think Thomas is going to put a link to this PowerPoint in the chat if there's anything that you want to refer to. But yeah, Yakuke, thank you, Yakuke Chetu, for your time today. I've put a QR code here for Balancha Public Access, and then also our email address is listed there. But yeah, I'd love to open it up for comments and questions, and they don't have to be questions, they can just be comments too. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Haley. Sorry for the interruption in the middle of your talk. Haley, do you want to moderate questions, or would you like me to?
I'm struggling. Would you mind?
I can do it. Yeah, that's fine. So if you do have a question, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand, and Thomas or I will call on you. See, I don't see any questions yet. There are several thank yous. I can read the comments. Thank you for your beautiful presentation. Such grace and radiance, so much to think about. I love these remixes, creating beautiful works of art over reimagining what archival work can do. Several more thank yous. Does anyone have a question? Yeah, you can also just unmute yourself and ask a question. And maybe we can stop sharing so we can all see each other. Can we unspotlight? Let's see, there we go. I have a question, since nobody else has a question yet. I'm wondering, I feel like the expectation of most people who work in archives is that the researchers are there to do academic work. And I'm wondering if that expectation creates challenges for those who are interested in doing more kind of creative projects out of the work.
Yeah, I think that, most archives that I've been into are based on the written memory system. And so they're based on this idea that you are interested in accessing, contributing to, or creating new pieces of expression within a written memory system. And then understanding that other communities have different memory systems that may not be written ones. We have collective memory, we have oral history. You have a growing amount of digital or visuospatial memory systems. And so, yeah, I think if you're accessing a collection, there is this assumption that you're coming in as part of kind of the written memory system culture. And so if you're interested in doing things that are more visual, more oral history, more collective, it's definitely a moment of translation that goes to that person to be able to, describe what their memory system is, describe their relevance or their work within that memory system, and the impact they have of translating this written word into a different memory system.
Thank you. Yeah, Susan has a question. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay. Hi, Haley. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's great to see you. As you know, I have spent a lot of time thinking about copyright and Creative Commons licenses, and I'm seeing like two avenues for this work. I mean, there's many avenues, but I was thinking about the idea of transformation and how transformation is very much part of fair use here in the United States, right? So in some ways, like the efforts to get permission from the archives, yes, do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but another place to look is transformative use of material kind of trumps the copyright on that material, right? So that's one thing that I'm interested in your thoughts on. And the other one is putting Creative Commons licenses on what you and the artists are creating to the extent that you can, depending on what material you've drawn from. Have you considered that, or have you done that?
Yeah, so I think I'm sure the second part of the question just kind of like splashed a lot of information. Like I have a lot of thoughts on that. So I'm going to go with that one. And then maybe you can remind me of the first question that you asked, because I'm on a different train now. But I think one of the things that, this project became, I'm sorry, I'm going to start with the first one. I remember the first one. One of the main tenets of this project is relationships. And so along with trying to create places for hope and imagination and cultural participation, one of our main missions is to create healthy relationships. That was within the intertribal, area of the Gulf South, but it's also with anyone who is in relationship with those materials, those histories, or those people. And so we wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to reach out to an archive. We don't see this as something, there's this onus or this pressure, or there might be like some legal reasons why, we're interested in doing this. But I think there's also this understanding of that, as holding parts of our community, you are now part of our community within the archive. And we need to start and establish and maintain relationships with those people and entities. And so when we think about the legal process, I think of the legal process less of something that has to be done and more of a process of a dance, something that's important to keep up and keep pace, and is a way for us to interact and communicate with each other, and keeps a expansion of communication open for more complex asks in the future. So by asking for these things that may be fair use, we're starting this dance, are these, interaction steps that allow us to have a relationship that we can build on for more complex things in the future. When we're thinking about the use of this work, I think that that's kind of like, that's kind of currently in flux. I mean, I think, as the collective, Ida, Jean-Luc, and myself, there's this constant question of where's Bulbancha Public Access going to go in the future? What if one of us leaves, and we're always welcoming new artists and new contributors? So what is that going to look like when the institution changes? But I think one of the things that this began with was a frustration about how much of our cultural history and memory is stuck within places that are no longer accessible. And so what does it look like to make things that are radically visible and radically open in a way that, it's hard to reduce or erase things that are publicly available to be remixed and reused. So rather than copywriting, we're really more interested in copylefting and making things as accessible as possible.
We have two hands raised.
Can I actually follow up with you just a second, Haley, or maybe we should do it on another occasion, because the moment you create something is protected by copyright, and you have the option of copylefting. Anyway, we can revisit this later. Sorry, I don't want to hog.
Love to, yeah. Good to see you. Hope we can talk some more soon.
Alam Jabber, or I don't know how to say your name. Do you still have a hand up?
I did. I took it down because now I'm a little nervous to ask a question, but it's Ahlam Jabber.
Oh, do you want to ask? Do you want to ask?
Yeah, I might as well. Thank you for your talk. It was really beautiful and helpful, Haley. Thank you. I'm a PhD student at St. Louis University, and I'm taking a Native American and Indigenous Studies course right now, where we're actually working directly with the archive at our university. And I've been trying to kind of create this sort of creative research guide where I'm like pulling various Native writers, authors, and connecting them to a Jesuit conversation book that we found in the archive. And I guess I just wanted to know if you could maybe speak to like the usefulness of like a research guide versus creating some sort of like versus like an archive itself. And if you think that, pulling these archival materials and connecting them to various Native creative writers, is that more of a curation or more of like a space in which people can contribute? I'm struggling a little bit through my project because I want this to be something that I kind of create a space for and like step away from as a non-Native person. I don't know if there's a question there or if this is something that you can.
No, yeah, and I'd love to talk to you more about this. I mean, feel free to email me if you want to talk a little bit more about this. I have a lot of opinions, and they're not popular. I think one of my largest opinions is that this idea of, what community is asking for this, or how are you asked to create this? Were you asked by your institution? Were you asked by your need to complete your degree? Or were you asked by a community that has said that this is necessary? And if you're creating something that you're trying to make live after that, thinking about whose momentum is going to move this forward, and if that's matched with the momentum it takes to move it forward. So, if it's an archive that's thinking that this is relevant to move forward, are they willing to put, backfill and put the effort and pressure after you leave? Are you asking a community to put effort and backfill, but haven't asked them yet to be present within the design of whatever you're making? So thinking about that, about, where is the pressure to a momentum to making this? And does that match with the pressure and momentum that will be available after you leave? Another thought I have on that is just also thinking about memory systems and thinking about, if you're working, I think direct consultation or work with the communities and direct relationships is the most important thing. And thinking about, instead of, creating something that may be useful within the archival memory system, what is it that the community needs within their own existing memory system? And how do you translate archival materials into that memory system? I can almost guarantee you that's not a guide, but I'm not sure. I don't know what community, I don't know that sense, but I know within my own community, this idea of time to digest, or, access that is more temporally related, or time and space for collective understanding and relationship with material, was much more relevant than guided, than a guide. But I don't know for your community. But yeah, I'd love to talk more.
Yeah, thank you. How can I access your email?
Yeah, I can pop it in the chat.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that's very helpful.
And the last question we'll take is James Neal.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Haley. I wanted to speak a little bit about your personal and professional career and life. I was so excited when you moved to the Washington, D.C. area. I think it was like during the pandemic or right before the pandemic. But can you speak to how your return to Louisiana has informed your work, and then any experiences that you had while living in Washington, D.C. might have shaped your perspective on the field? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And good to see you again, James.
See you.
Yeah, I think so. Like, thinking about what is it to be distanced from your community and still work on community projects, and then also thinking about what is it to be distanced from a research site, and and also not being able to access those things. And I think if we're thinking about the archives in Washington and community in Louisiana, it's like I can have one or the other, right? I can have access, unlimited access to all of the archives that have information, or I can be in a waterlogged, very high risk flood area where no important collections are kept under any reasonable SWOT assessment of where to place an archive. And so there's this question of like, what is more relevant? And I think that, a lot of the work of the, what started as a homo language project, but also my continued interest in the connection between organized digital cultural participation and Indigenous contemporary communities, comes from the idea that, our place will be underwater fairly soon. Our place is underwater. A lot of places are very inaccessible. And so there is this moment of migration that's happening within my own community. And a lot of the work with both Wabancha Public Access and the Homo Language Project is interrogating this idea of what does culture or organized cultural participation look like in moments of climate migration. We have people who are moving off their places where memory systems are built. And so is there a way that we can create digital cultural participation moments for people, such as the Homo Language Project and the Indigenous Gulf Stream? And are there places where, something that we're still kind of understanding is just like, what is the impact of climate migration on our memory systems that are so very land-based and so very, very water-based, and both of those are changing very quickly. So that's just ongoing life quests. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Haley. I just wanted to mention that there are a lot of comments in the chat that are very rich, and we will be sending you the chat transcript so you have a chance to look at all of those. We just want to thank you again for this wonderful discussion. And do you have anything that you want to say before we close it off?
Okay, and shout out to everyone who's here. I mean, thanks for everyone who showed up. Shout out to John, Warford, Raven, Anna, Brittany. Try to see other names that are still around. But thank you guys so much for coming and being a part of this. Rachel, Claire, nice to see you guys. Stephanie, thanks everyone who joined, and thanks for going on this quest.
Yeah, we're really excited to continue this conversation. It's something we've been thinking about a lot at the APS. So thanks for getting shot in the arm for it. And enjoy a restful December. Thank you, everybody.
Happy Pesach, everyone.